Early August 2026, Danielle Bergoli filmed a video for TikTok. The platform barely noticed her anymore. It had moved on to creators who had never existed before she became famous, to children building entire brands in spaces that did not exist when she was still learning to navigate public scrutiny. But she posted anyway. The video was constructed deliberately. It was what people called a thirst trap, a photograph or video designed to generate desire and engagement. She was performing the role she had been assigned by an algorithm and an audience that had been watching her for a decade. The response arrived within hours. X, formerly known as Twitter, became the primary site of interpretation. The comments were mostly obscene. They were not, pretending to engage with anything beyond her body. People who did not know her name, who had only seen photographs, made statements about what they would do if given the opportunity. This was the baseline discourse, but scattered among the explicit material were fragments of something more interesting, something closer to confusion. "She looks different every time we see her," one person wrote. Another suggested, with barely concealed judgment, "All right, maybe they were onto something with that cultural appropriation thing." A third observer offered a more philosophical assessment. "She went through a hell of an identity crisis, huh?" These comments were not hostile. They were observational. They were expressions of disorientation in the face of accumulating change. They were the sounds of people who had been Kasazandist, watching for years, trying to track what was real and what was constructed, and finding it increasingly difficult to distinguish between the two. The difficulty was understandable. Danielle Bergoli had become famous as a 14-year-old. This was not an exaggeration. She had appeared on television at 13, but the viral moment had occurred on the precipice of her transition into adolescence. She had been a child. Then she had not been. Had happened in public, in real time, with millions of people serving as witnesses and judges. She had aged as a public spectacle. Every year of her life had been documented. Every decision about her appearance, every shift in her aesthetic, every modification of her body had been recorded and archived and analyzed by strangers. The Dr. Phil appearance in 2016 had been marketed as an intervention, a mother who could not control her daughter, a child who had stolen cars and broken laws and twerked on television. The show's framework had been sympathetic toward the parent. The child was positioned as the problem. But what the episode actually captured was a 13-year-old girl who understood, even then, that her primary value to the world was her capacity to shock and entertain. When the audience laughed at her, she had responded not with shame but with aggression. "Catch me outside. How about that?" The phrase had gone viral because it contained something authentic. It was not a rehearsed performance. It was a genuine response to genuine humiliation. The meme had made her famous. The fame had monetized her anger. Within a year, she had released music. Within 2 years, she had charted on Billboard. She had transformed from a meme into an artist, or at least into something that occupied that category in the contemporary landscape. The transformation was remarkable. Most viral sensations had lifespans of weeks or months. She had somehow managed to extend hers. She had evolved. She had rebranded. She had learned the mechanics of attention and survival in an environment where both were scarce and valuable. But the evolution had required a bargain. She had to remain visible. She had to continue to produce content. She had to keep offering pieces of herself to an audience that had been trained to consume her. The OnlyFans decision, made just after her 18th birthday in 2021, had been a recognition of this reality. She had understood that her body, her sexuality, her existence as a young woman was what the world was actually interested in. Everything else, the music, the business ventures, the brand deals, were secondary. The primary asset was herself. The OnlyFans account had generated what would eventually total over $70 million. This was not metaphorical wealth. This was real money. She had achieved financial independence before the age of 20. This was the rare story. This was the transformation. that mattered, except that it had come at a specific cost. She had monetized her body. She had opened it up to the desires of millions of strangers. She had converted her physicality into currency, and now she was bound to that system indefinitely. Problem was not with the monetization itself. The problem was that monetization did not actually provide the freedom it promised. She had solved one problem, economic dependence, and created another, radical exposure. Every decision about her body had become a financial decision, provided unexpected context. She was undergoing treatment. The treatment was causing weight gain. She had embraced this weight gain publicly, had documented it, had positioned it as a victory. This was complicated. The weight gain was real. The health circumstances were real, but the public documentation of these circumstances meant that they could never remain private. They could never be purely about her health. They had to be about her image, her narrative, her brand. The transformation had been underway for years. The rhinoplasty in early 2025, the blonde hair, the references to Brazilian butt lifts and lip fillers, the accumulation of tattoos, the shift toward a more deliberately constructed aesthetic. Each transformation had been positioned as either authenticity or destruction, rarely as something more nuanced. When she had explained that she had received butt injections since she was 17, the response had been split. Some people had praised her honesty, others had questioned why she had done this so young. Few had questioned the broader system that made it seem reasonable for a teenager to have cosmetic procedures. By August 2026, the transformations had become so frequent that they seemed almost reflexive. She would change, people would respond, the response would generate engagement. The engagement would validate the choice to transform. The cycle would begin again. She had learned to feed the machine that had created her. What had begun as a process of growth and change and authentic development had calcified into a performance of change. The comments on the August video were less about the specific transformation and more about the aggregate effect of accumulated transformations. She looks different every time we see her.
Feeling on my body while he rub up on my titties, call me Mrs. Taffy, baby, he show up.
Was not an observation about a single decision. It was a comment on the velocity and consistency of change. They had seen her go through adolescence and early adulthood and health crises and relationship drama. They had watched her age. They had watched her modify herself. And now they were watching her modify herself again and again and again. The specific reference to identity crisis was more pointed. It suggested that the transformations were evidence of psychological instability. It suggested that a person who changed their appearance this frequently must be unstable. But this interpretation missed something important. She was not undergoing changes because she was confused about who she was. She was undergoing changes because she was extremely clear about what the world wanted from her. She was simply updating the offering. She was keeping the product fresh. She was feeding the algorithm and the audience and the mechanism that had been designed to consume her. The reference to cultural appropriation was more obscure. It seemed to suggest that she was imitating someone else, adopting an aesthetic that belonged to another person or community. The context was probably the ongoing feud with Alabama Barker. Both young women were famous. Both had undergone significant cosmetic transformations. Both presented versions of femininity that involved platinum blonde hair and surgically enhanced bodies. The comparison between them had become inevitable. Online communities had positioned them as rivals, had suggested that one was copying the other, had made the bodies themselves into the site of competition. What this discourse missed was the deeper question about who these young women were performing for. Both of them had been born into systems of visibility. Alabama Barker, daughter of the Blink-182 drummer Travis Barker, had inherited fame from her family. Danielle Bregoli had created hers from viral infamy. Both had monetized their bodies. Both had accumulated significant wealth. Both had undergone cosmetic procedures. The comparison was inevitable, But the comparison also revealed something important about how celebrity operated in 2026. The bodies of young women had become the primary site of cultural discourse, not their art, not their business acumen, not their intelligence, their bodies, their faces, their transformations. Danielle Bregoli had at least been transparent about this. She had named the procedures. She had explained the timeline. She had refused to participate in the fiction that her appearance was naturally achieved. But transparency did not actually change the fundamental dynamics. It did not make the scrutiny less intense. It did not make the commentary less judgmental. If anything, it had intensified the discussion. By naming what she had done, she had made herself vulnerable to criticism on an entirely different level. People could no longer pretend that her transformation was mysterious. They could only debate whether she should have done it. The accusations that she was lying about her cancer diagnosis had been particularly vicious. Some people had suggested that the weight gain and other physical changes contradicted the cancer narrative. Some had suggested that she was fabricating the diagnosis for sympathy. She had denied these allegations. She had provided medical documentation. She had explained the side effects of her medication, and yet the accusations persisted. Because that was what happened when a person's body became public property. Every inch of it was available for interpretation. The medical reality of the situation could not compete with the narrative impulse to interpret what was visible. The allegations of lying about cosmetic procedures had followed a similar pattern. She had admitted to certain procedures. She had been cagey about others. People had made assumptions about what she had and had not done. They had compared photographs from different eras. They had debated whether specific features were natural or constructed. She had responded to some of these questions and ignored others. The result was a kind of ongoing negotiation about what was real. No resolution was ever reached. The negotiation simply continued indefinitely. By her early 20s, Danielle Bregoli had achieved something remarkable. She had accumulated more wealth than most people would see in a lifetime. She had built a business empire. She had maintained relevance in a landscape where relevance was typically short-lived. She had survived her own viral infamy. She had managed her own rise. She had taken control of the machinery that had created her. And yet, she remained bound to that machinery. She could not stop producing content. She could not stop feeding the algorithm and the audience that had been trained to consume her. The August 2026 video was not unusual. It was not a deviation from her pattern. It was exactly on brand. She had transformed again. She had documented the transformation. She had posted it to a platform designed to maximize engagement. The response had been exactly what she should have expected. Some people had been aroused. Some people had been disturbed. Some people had been confused. All of them had watched. All of them had commented. All of them had participated in the ongoing interpretation of her body and her choices and her existence. What was remarkable about the event was not the event itself, but the repetition. This was not a one-time occurrence.